What do you do when you're stuck? One of our readers writes, "Hi all, I'm pretty stuck on CSS Grid. I'm thinking it's my working memory issues plus a lack of visualization. But I'm on my second go of CSS Grid Garden and I'm still struggling to retain it or even fully comprehend it. I'm also dyslexic. Reading comprehension difficulties. Any tips? Apart from just looking up the answer, which I've resorted to a couple of times." This is a really great question, and I'm excited to answer it. So let's break this down into some parts. We're going to use our mind map tool and work through this. So learning CSS, we have some challenges. One of them is working memory issues. Another one is lack of visualization, and another one is dyslexia, reading comprehension difficulties. Let's talk about advice. I want to start off with mindset because it's usually the best place to start. First thing that I want to cover is that everybody gets stuck. Absolutely everybody gets stuck while learning how to code. It's an inevitable thing that you're going to go through. So the first thing is don't give up. If this is a thing that you want, there are plenty of ways around it, so don't give up. And the second one, which is important to understand, is that this is normal. And we will talk about some specific issues, that relate to ADHD or other neurodiversities and how we can overcome those. But even without these things, understand that a computer language is like learning any other kind of a language. Ultimately, we are telling the computer to do a certain thing, but requires us to think in a different way. It requires us to think in a way that we're not used to thinking. And so I really want to stress that part of the learning process is understanding that there is a new language to be learned here, and that doesn't necessarily mean memorizing a string of characters, memorizing a syntax, memorizing the words of a foreign language isn't going to do you any good if you don't understand the nuances behind the sentence structure. And learning a language doesn't necessarily teach you the nuances of what it is that you're trying to explain what to do. So let me give you an example here. Plumbing, right? So if I were teaching somebody how to do plumbing, I might use English while I'm talking to them, but I need to have knowledge of a plumbing system. So when we're talking about CSS and we're talking about laying things out in different ways, it's important to understand that we're learning a couple of different things, and one of them is how to plumb, how to connect these pipes together, and why, and there are nuances to that specific art that are perhaps very different than what it is to be an electric worker, or what it is to be a roofer, or what it is to be a framer. In the very same way, when we're using computer languages, we need to do a thing with a specific trade, and it is true that you find when you're building houses, going on with that analogy, you find that you're building you get a general contractor. And yeah, the general contractor can do plumbing, but they may not necessarily be great at it. They might have to look some things up or ask some questions, or they might work slowly, or when they do work and they have to do 4 sinks, those sinks might just be a little bit different. Not quite as consistent as a pro plumber who just does plumbing every day. So understand that while learning a thing, that part of it is learning the language, but then the other part is learning the mechanics of what it is that we're trying to achieve. With CSS, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how something is going to look, or how it's going to behave visually in a browser. So understand that we're learning a couple of different things here. It really is normal to go through some challenges when we are trying to use our brain to think in a way that we haven't thought before. All right, so, and then the next one is and kudos because you did a great job here. Ask for help. Too often, somebody will start programming, they'll get stuck, they won't be able to figure it out themselves, and they get discouraged and ultimately give up. There are so many different places to ask for help, and you just need to be in the mindset of knowing that you've got that, and that's okay. So those are some mindset things to take in mind. Next, I want to talk about our environment. And this may not be the answer that you thought that you were going to get when you asked, how do I do a better job at learning CSS? But specifically, I want to speak to the lack of visualization and the working memory issues, and which, by the way, are both things that I struggle with myself, and that many other experienced, awesome software developers experience. It does mean, for me, it means that I learn slower. But also, there are things that I do much faster, and so it all balances out. But understand that while you're learning, you may need to put in a little bit of extra work. That's okay. Okay, so environment. Your monitor, your screen real estate, being able to spread things out. Right now, I've just got one big thing on this screen, but if I were to make it smaller and I were to bring it over here, and then I were to take, let's see, another window. In fact, I'm going to bring this window over because this is my system display settings. What you're going to see here is that I actually have 3 monitors that I'm looking at right now. So I've got one 4K monitor in front of me, and I've got 2 1080s. And now granted, I use this setup for teaching quite a bit. I've got another setup that I use for developing. I've got a similar setup. It is not to show off that I've got multiple monitors that I use these. I need these to get my work done. To try to work on a single monitor, you know that feeling where you run up to the top of the stairway and you get up there and then you have no idea why you went up there, and then you have to run back downstairs into the kitchen again, and then you're like, oh, now I remember, and then you have to run back upstairs again. Well, that happens when you switch windows. It happens when it comes to organization, we want to try to externalize our working memory. And the neat thing is that if we put things visually certain places, at least for me, I've got a little bit of a memory of where I might have put a thing. And the effort involved in bringing my eyes over here, and then bringing my eyes over here, and then bringing my eyes back over here, and then bringing them back over here, it is a very natural thing to think, if I need that information over there, I can just look that way. As opposed to flipping through and trying to figure out where my monitor is, or where my window is. And so I strongly encourage multiple monitors because you can lay things out visually and have this visual reference and not forget what you're looking at. So, for example, when we look at CSS Grid Garden, which is the learning platform that was mentioned here, which is really just kind of a little game site to learn CSS Grid. If we were to full screen this and work with just this, and I'm on level 1, and I go through and I do, all right, so let's see if I do grid, column, start, through, and it pretty much tells you how to solve this first one. If I'm reading through this, I see there are columns. If I count these, there are 5 of them. There's another columns here. If I count them, there's 5 of them. 5 times 20 is 100. If you're not good at math, don't worry. There's certain math that's just you're going to become good at math is what's gonna happen. That mentality of I'm not good at math, well, it's usually because we weren't interested when it was taught to us. But And usually that's because we didn't have a reason to use it. But now all of a sudden, you're going to have a reason to use it, and you will learn math. You'll get better at it. And it doesn't hurt to write that down as a thing to study. There's lots of resources to learn math. But anyway, I'm going on a tangent. I want to go back to, all right, so I'm going to move this to column 3. And sure enough, I've moved this over. I click next. Okay, so now I'm on the next page, and what you'll notice is that I can't see the previous page, and my memory sucks. So I don't even know what I just typed. And so I find myself wanting to go back. Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Okay, so let's see. So I go back. So here is the next tip. So having this screen real estate is valuable for this reason. Let me maximize this and zoom up again. And so my advice, let me move my windows around a little bit. Okay, so screen real estate is going to be really important. That can be multiple monitors. But there's another thing that you may not be aware of that I want to make sure to point out before we move on, and then we're going to come back to that, which is that when you look at a specific display, you've got a couple of settings. Specifically, right here, you'll see the display resolution. So I'm looking at this display right now, and my display resolution says 1920 by 1080. That is the minimum screen resolution that you're going to want. If your numbers are smaller than that, and the way to get here, by the way, is if you right click, go to display settings, it should bring that up. You may just have one big display. If I click on this one, that's my 4K monitor. That one has a higher resolution. I do video editing on this. You don't necessarily need, nor do I really recommend 4K. You almost have to squint too much. It's almost too high of a resolution unless you've got a large enough screen. What I do recommend is, and the one that I use, let me flip over. Behind here, this is an ultra wide, and I can't remember the resolution offhand, but maybe I'll add it to the video afterwards. Let's see. But having high screen resolution is going to be important. Let's see. So the next thing I want you to see is this zoom here. This zoom makes things bigger, and then you just can't fit as much on the screen. So I always go down to 100%, as long as my eyes can handle it. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And I know you thought you were going to get tips on CSS, and we're going in a different direction. But I want you to understand that all of these tooling decisions, they really do matter. They matter significantly. If we're learning disabled and it takes us 30% longer to learn something because we struggle with working memory issues and we struggle with these challenges, it's okay. We just find advantages. What's an advantage that allows us to work 10% faster or 5% faster? And let's stack those up with each other. And before you know it, we're working just as fast as others. And one just really important thing that I can't stress enough is to have nice monitors so that you can fit a lot on your screen side by side, looking at it visually. And so then it doesn't matter. So, okay, let me get back to what I was saying. Okay, so multiple monitors, but also screen resolution. You also want to consider your screen size. And now the next thing I want to identify is that you don't have to spend a ton of money on monitors. These are those things that go very inexpensive. If you go to Facebook Marketplace, if you honestly just post on your social media and say, hey, does anybody have an extra monitor that I could have? so often somebody gets a new computer, it comes with a monitor, they put one in the basement somewhere. You can usually get a very low-cost monitor, and often that will meet the requirements that you need. But also understand that you can get very inexpensive monitors. Let me flip back to this camera for just a moment and show you that this is a portable monitor. It's about the size of a laptop monitor. I had it setting up on a stand. I got this for $80 new. It was a sale. Is it the best quality monitor I've ever had? No. But is it entirely functional, and does it have that 1080 resolution that I need? It does. And this is the monitor that I often take with me when I'm traveling, and I need a portable monitor so that I can have multiple monitors when I'm working. So $80, and the neat thing about this one is that it gets both its power and its connection over a USB-C port, so you don't even need its own power supply. Really fantastic device. And then picked up a just a really easy stand. This is a little bit heavier. I don't always travel with it. I've got a lighter plastic, cheaper one that I might travel with. So yeah, that's one of the secrets is having a lot of screen real estate. So now I want to show you how to use that. So let's go to also within our environment, taking notes. So there are two applications that come pre-installed with Windows. One of them is Microsoft OneNote, and the other one is Snipping Tool. In some of my other content, I might talk about an alternative to the Snipping Tool, but this comes pre-installed on Windows, and actually I haven't done a lot of installs in the machine that I'm on right now, so I'm just going to show you this for now. So OneNote is a note application. It looks kind of like this. And the neat thing is that you can paste almost anything into this. Images, you can type, and so how is that relevant to this? If I'm working with Grid Garden and I shrink this down to a smaller footprint, and let's see, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And then I bring over my notes. Now, I might actually have this on two different monitors, but it's just to illustrate the idea. I delete those. So what I can do is if I hit my start menu and type snip, I'm going to bring up the snipping tool. And the snipping tool looks like so it lets me grab this like so, and now I've got an image of this. So I might copy this, come over here and paste it as a visual reference. So now I can see that next page as I'm working on this one. I actually just clicked on that thinking it was the page. So now I can move on to the next page and I can see the old one. But also what I might do, so let's see, this is use grid column start, poison, the weed start at the 5th, vertical grid line. I'm going to say grid column start. So I'm going to guess that that means 5, and yep, okay. Okay, so I'm able to see this. The next thing I want to show you is I can just grab all this and copy it and come over here and paste that as notes. It didn't come over wonderfully, but it's okay. But the other thing that I might do is create another page that is CSS, And I might just take ordinary notes. So CSS Grid. What are my properties so far? Grid, column, start. And I would probably change that setting that auto capitalizes things, because casing really matters in coding quite a bit, and you don't always capitalize the first letter of things. And so, maybe I just create this note for myself, and now I can go back and visually see that. Okay, let me come back to things to know. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how we can use your environment to help to overcome these things. I always have so many windows open and write myself the simplest of notes, the simplest notes. And and sometimes I'll even use sticky notes, like physical sticky notes stuck to my screen, if not any of the number of other applications that help with that thing that we'll talk about some other time. But okay, so next I want to talk about curriculum. Later in the conversation thread, I asked a couple of follow-up questions, and let me see if I can pull that up right now. All right, community members said, working through Udacity content, have been struggling with this module. The audio is terrible and the instructor shouts for some reason. I can relate to how frustrating it is to have teachers with poor audio. I often struggle with accents. I struggle when others speed up their video. And if you're struggling with a particular curriculum, know there are so many other curriculums, and don't waste too much time on the specific curriculum that you're struggling with. Just find something else. These are very common topics. There are certainly some situations where we are learning and we're learning something that is new or obscure and there aren't a lot of sources, and so we just take what we can get. But especially in the topic of CSS, there are so many other opportunities. So just don't waste any more time with that particular instructor or the video, and we'll learn this from other sources. So what are some sources to go to? HTML, CSS, JavaScript, usually one of the places that I recommend starting is Free Code Camp. One downside of Free Code Camp as a resource is that it's a little time consuming, and it works best if you go through them each one at a time. And so it's a little bit more of a commitment if you decide to go this route. But if we go to Free Code Camp and we go to Get Started, and then you click on Responsive Web Design, they've got a bunch of courses. And for example, if we scroll down a little bit, there's the Learn the CSS Box Model by Building a Painting. If we go further, one on CSS Flexbox, let's go even further. Learn CSS Grid by Building a Magazine. Now, you might just try to drop directly to this particular curriculum and give it a shot. These are kind of neat. If you click Start Project, first what it does is it shows you this is what we're going to build. So you can get a sense of what we're aiming for. and then you click Start Coding, and you do all of the code in the website. But the way this one works essentially is you just kind of start typing your code here. And like I said, this is a little bit easier if you start from the beginning, and it would be many, many hours or even days of catch up just to get to this point, only to learn CSS Grid, so it may not be worth it. But understand that that's one opportunity or option for you. But also you might be able to figure this out. Now, when it comes to the reading and the dyslexia, the best thing that I can do here is just offer the encouragement is that it's okay if it takes you a little bit more time. It's okay. And you will learn some strategies that will help you out. Sometimes when I'm reading and I have the opportunity, if I'm reading with my computer, I'll actually use my mouse to kind of keep track of where I'm at. If I'm reading a book, I will often get a very light pencil and I will kind of check paragraphs off as I read them, so that if all of a sudden I realize I'm lost, I've been reading for who knows how many paragraphs, and I just haven't been paying attention, or I was, but now poof, it goes. And I have no idea how far backwards I need to read. It gets frustrating when you have to read over and over and over again. So one of the things that I do to limit the amount of rereading that I need to do is I write checkboxes next to the paragraphs on my physical books, so that I kind of know, and I'll only check it off if I feel like I totally get this paragraph. I'm really understanding this. No question. I'm connecting the dots, and then I move on to the next one. So those are some tips as it pertains to reading. But let's go on with other curriculums, because there's some other really great ones. The next one I'm going to call out is W3 Schools. So if you do so many searches online, you're going to get a W3 Schools related result, because this is one of two really staple websites that you're going to be able to learn on. So if I go to CSS here and I find CSS advanced transitions, CSS Grid. This is going to be a fantastic tutorial that you can kind of read through, and you can try these things on the website itself. Experiment with it and get a sense of why. Why is it? Make some changes here, see what happens. So that's a great learning resource. The next learning resource is Mozilla Developer Network. This is more of a kind of a reference guide, probably more than anything else, but probably the most comprehensive reference guide on CSS that's out there on the web. And if we were to do a search for CSS grid layout, again, you're going to see yet another illustration. And this is neat because it's showing you kind of what happens when you do some overlaps. And it looks like there's a play button right here. And then sure enough, I can experiment with this right here. So I could find this one, and it says grid columns 1/3. So here all of a sudden I could explore. Okay, next. There are some great interactive applications. In fact, one of them is the one that you led with, CSS Grid Garden, which is nice in that it's kind of gamified and it's visual, but as we saw when we were working with it, it doesn't do a great job of letting you see things, seeing notes, looking it up. So you kind of have to have certain things committed to memory. And so that's where having that open side by side with, let's say, this, but even going back and just going to the reference, and so now you can kind of use this as reference material, read through it. And kind of flip back and forth between those resources. And again, I would have multiple monitors. So this would be over here, another thing would be over here, another thing would be over here, and I might flip between them. If one doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to find another resource. Other ones that are great, not for CSS Grid specifically, but if you look for Flexbox Froggy, that is the Flexbox thing that is very similar to CSS Grid, also CSS Diner. And I think that is no longer at, yeah, so that's at a GitHub location, but it looks like this. And essentially it's about learning CSS selectors. So it says select elements. Let's see, what is my puzzle? Select the plates. So it's going to be every plate. And so in this case, it's just going to be the word plate. All right, so now I'm on to my next one. It says select the bento boxes, bento. Next, select the fancy plate. Well, let's see, it's a plate, but it's got an ID, so I could do pound fancy. So yeah, these games are neat because they kind of have you exercise things. But as you indicated, you know, if you can't figure it out through memory, then sometimes you just need to use that reference material and try to get a sense of what it means. Okay, so and then also there was a comment about some math. So I want to talk about the math for a minute. Because there are some of these oh, actually, one more resource really quick. CSS Zen Garden is really amazing. So CSS Zen Garden, all of this data is the same HTML, but if you click on one of these themes, like this one, if you look closely, this is the same website that has been, it just lays things out differently with only CSS. If I click on this other one, again, this is a website that it's laying out the exact same thing. The exact same thing. We've even got some fancy animations. All of this is done with CSS. So if I actually click on CSS file, and then I open that up, and so that just opened itself up in Visual Studio Code over here. So I could learn how the CSS is written to achieve that, and really it's quite kind of small and elegant. It's not as fancy as one might think. If I hit F12 and I open up my dev toolbar, and so then I can look at this element, for example, and look at the applied rules. So that's the other thing, is reverse engineering sites that are out there. And so if you're getting stuck with CSS Grid, maybe it's because you don't have a specific need where it feels relevant to you. And maybe that will come later. When you have the need, there are things that you know that you don't know, and there are things that you don't know that you don't know. And so what's important is that you know that CSS Grid is a thing, and it can be used to lay things out in a grid-like manner. So when you have that need, you'll push your way through it. You'll have a very specific destination in mind, and then you'll work through it then. Understand that coders don't just memorize everything. I have been doing this stuff for 25 years, and I consistently look things up, like how to do a thing with CSS Grid, because it's been, I get to the point now where I've literally worked with hundreds of languages. I don't even try to remember things. I just know, like, whatever gets memorized naturally just happens because I happen to be doing a lot of it. Otherwise, I know I'm going to look it up. And I'm just constantly looking things up all day long. That's okay. It's how we can get things done. There's no need to memorize things. And I think a lot of early developers, are kind of feeling that imposter syndrome, like, I'm never gonna, but what happens, or what's going to happen, is you're going to be faced with a project and you're going to forget everything about what that project requires you to do, all the specifics about the language. And you're going to have to go and look a bunch of things up. You're going to take a large problem, you're going to break it down into a lot of smaller problems, and you're going to solve them one at a time. And at least the first 12 to 24 times you solve a particular similar problem, you're going to be looking it up. Maybe you get to the point where you do a lot of HTML, CSS, and that's just your thing, and you get really good at it, and you're operating very fast. Well, that's great, but still there may be a time in your career where all of a sudden you don't use it for 3 years because you're working on some back-end stuff, or you just, for whatever reason, didn't have a reason to use it, and all of a sudden all your knowledge is going to be outdated because technology moves fast. And you're going to give you an example, I can remember the time 6 or 7 years ago when somebody said, oh, well, I'm just going to use CSS Grid. And I said, well, what's that? Well, surely you know what CSS Grid is. No, I don't. I had just been using standard old CSS positioning, which is before Flexbox and CSS Grid really became supported universally with browsers. So you get to learn that things are a certain way, and then new things come out and trends change. And so don't worry about memorizing these things. You do want to feel like you have a certain level of comprehension early. Like you want to feel like you're not totally lost, and that if you had a need, that you could come back to this material and figure it out. But don't feel like you need to have all this stuff memorized. It's okay if you don't. It is, because in life there's no such thing as a test that's not open book. They're all open book tests. The internet is always there for you to search, and you've always got resources that you can look things up as you go. And that's fine. Okay, so we have CSS Grid Garden, and we've got oh yeah, math. So here's something that I might do. If we move here, and let's say I'm moving forward a few, and now I need math in some way. Like, I think there's one of these where, yeah, so if you want to count grid from the right to the, instead of the left, you can give grid column start and grid column end negative values. For example, you can set it to -1. Okay, so I'm going to do grid column end is going to be a -1. So this really isn't math per se. It's more like naming. And so to give you an example of what I mean there, if I use my snipping tool to snip this, and then I take it over here, and I can draw on it. I don't have a pen here, so, okay, so this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5, this is -1, this is -2, this is -3, this is -4, this is -5. It's okay to create visual references where you can stare at those numeric values as titles. It's okay to do that. And developers will do these things all the time. To give you an example, often we're dealing with pixels, but there will be a certain number of pixels that should be the width of a border or the width of a gutter. And so sometimes I get graph paper out and I kind of draw out what numbers will be, or I'll draw on something like this. But understand that that's okay. We don't really need to be good at math. We can get better at math, and you will naturally become better at math just because you're using it more if it's something that you need to do a lot more. But like when we start playing with these other ones where, let's say that, oh, I'm not on the website. Let's say I'm doing a range, and it's going to be to the grid column end. And I think, oh, well, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and I put 3 in there. And then I'm like, what? Why is it not highlighting the third? Right? So off by 1 errors are really common. For whatever reason, this is behaving in such a way that the grid column end is in this forward way. It is the first one that will not be included. Like, don't include it. So really, this is the first one that I'm not including, and that's at 4. And that's my answer. So if you don't remember that and you try to 3, just don't stress over it. You'll get it right eventually. You'll fix it, and then you'll move on, and then on to different problems. Okay, I think that's probably a load of information right now. Hopefully you found this to be kind of helpful. Stick with it. Getting through it and having some level of comprehension temporarily, and then forgetting it all as you move on to bigger and different things is perfectly acceptable. It's just part of the process. All that we really need to be is able to learn a thing for a very short period of time, long enough to do something with it, and that's it. Don't worry about remembering this stuff long term. Don't worry if it takes you a little bit longer. All of that will resolve itself in time. All right, thanks very much. If you would like any of your questions answered, I encourage you to post it in the Neurodiverse Code Club community Facebook group. I am going to continue to spend some time answering these questions just for the general public. Thank you very much. I hope everybody has a great day, evening, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are at the time you're watching this.